Good evening, guys. In the previous classes, we understood what is Angular. Okay, we understood Angular architecture. We discussed about Angular building blocks. Angular building blocks. We discussed about components in the Angular. We discussed about templates in the Angular. We discussed about data binding techniques in the Angular. And we discussed about directives in the Angular, and we discussed about pipes in the Angular, and we discussed about services in the Angular, forms development, forms development, forms validations in the Angular, and we discussed about routing in the Angular. So we understood these topics in the Angular. So let's quickly revise this. What is Angular? Angular is a client-side framework which is used to develop user interface of the applications. When it comes to the Angular architecture, components will be available, templates will be available, directives will be available, pipes will be available, directives, pipes, data binding, services will be available. Those are called as building blocks of the Angular. Component contains application logic, template contains presentation logic. Every component will have its own template. So to manipulate the DOM elements, we will go for directives. To manipulate the DOM elements, we'll go for directives. To transform the data before displaying, we are going for pipes concept. We are going for pipes concept. Good. Now here services are used to write the business logic. Components will represent a portion of the web page. Services will represent business logic. Component can access the service. Data binding is used to establish the relation between component and template. Interpolation, property binding, event binding, two-way data binding will be available. Directives are used to manipulate the DOM. Pipes are used to transform the data. Services will contain the business logic. Forms development. Here, forms can be developed in two ways, guys. One is by using template driven approach, and the second one is by using reactive approach. Forms will be developed in two ways. One is by using template driven approach. Second one is reactive approach. When we go for template driven approach, we will use ng model. When we go for reactive approach, we will go for form controller with form group. Form controller with form group we are going to use. Form validations, routing. Routing is used to establish navigation between one page to the another page. All right. With this knowledge, today we are going to understand how to integrate Spring Boot with Angular integration. The main agenda of learning Angular is to understand how to integrate our Spring Boot application with Angular. Okay, here Spring Boot. Spring Boot is used to develop. Spring Boot is used to develop backend REST APIs. Spring Boot is used to develop backend REST APIs. REST API nothing but a RESTful service, or we can call as a web service. Spring Boot is used to develop backend REST APIs. Now, Angular is used to develop front end of the application. Is used to develop backend REST APIs for the application. Spring Boot is used to develop backend REST APIs for the application. Angular is used to develop front end of the application. So to make our application full stack application, now to execute the backend and front end, we need to establish the integration between front end and backend. Okay, Angular is used to develop front end of the application. Spring Boot is used to develop backend REST APIs for the application. Front end application should access backend REST APIs to execute the business logic. Front end application contains user interface. Front end application contains user interface. Backend application contains business logic. Backend APIs contains business logic. Backend APIs contains business logic. Front-end application contains user interface. Okay, user interface should access backend REST APIs. Front-end application should access backend APIs. Front-end application should access backend APIs. This is the main agenda. We are going to use a Spring Boot. Spring Boot is used to develop a backend REST APIs for the application. Angular is used to develop a front end of the application. Front end application contains a user interface. Backend contains business logic. Front end contains user interface. Front end application should access backend APIs. Front end application should access backend APIs. If you can develop your application like this, then it is called as a full stack development. Full stack development is nothing but front end development plus back end development. This is called as a full stack development. So we are developing front end of the application by using Angular. Then we are developing back end of the application by using Spring Boot. What is called as full stack development? Front end development plus back end development is called as full stack development. Now we know how to develop the REST APIs by using Spring Boot, and we know how to develop the front end by using Angular. So assume that this is my Angular application. This is my Angular application and this is my Spring Boot application. So Spring Boot application will run in one server. Angular application will run in one server. So this is our Spring Boot application and this is our Angular application. We need to establish the integration. We need to establish the communication between Angular application and the Spring Boot application. So Angular application should access this Spring Boot application. Then Spring Boot application should send the response back to Angular application. This Angular application will display the response to the end user. Now here end user will be available. End user is going to access our application. End user will access the back end of the application, or end user will access front end of the application. End user will access the front end application. Then front end application will access the back end application. So this is the execution flow. User will interact with the front end. User will interact with the front end. Front end we are developing by which technology? Front end we are developing by using Angular. Backend we are developing by using which technology? Backend we are developing by using Spring Boot. Are you guys able to follow my point? Angular application should be integrated with the Spring Boot application. Backend logic will be available in the Spring Boot. Front-end logic will be available in the Angular. End user will communicate with the Angular application. Then this Angular application should communicate with the Spring Boot. Now end user will send a request. Assume that this is request number 1. Then Angular application will talk to Spring Boot application. Spring Boot application, when end user send a request by using browser, request will go to Angular. Angular application will execute some logic. Then Angular application will send the request to backend. Then backend application will execute some logic. Backend application will send the response to Angular. Angular application will do some manipulation on the response. Finally, Angular application will send the response to the user. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. From user to Angular. In the Angular, some logic will execute. From the Angular, it will talk to Spring Boot. In the Spring Boot, some logic will execute. Then Spring Boot will give the response to Angular. In the Angular, some logic will execute. Then Angular will give the response to end user. Got it? Now, let me develop this application, guys. So first, let me create one simple REST API by using Spring Boot. Just we want to get some welcome message. Just I want to get welcome message so that you will understand how that integration will happen between Spring Boot application and Angular application. Very basic example we will develop first to understand the integration. Once it is done, then we will develop a project. Okay. Yes. Let me create one simple Spring Boot REST API. If Spring Boot REST API is available, then we can do the integration of that. Okay, let's go here. File, new, other, Spring Boot project I want to create. Spring Boot, Spring Starter project. Now let me create Spring Boot REST API. Spring Boot REST API project I am creating, or else let me create Spring Boot app. I'm creating Spring Boot app 01. 01 Spring Boot app I am creating. Maven project I'm creating. Packaging is a jar. Java version 8. Language is a Java. Okay, fine, good. Click on next. Spring Boot version. Spring Boot 3.0 came into market. Select the web dependency. Then go for DevTools. DevTools. Web starter and DevTools I am taking. Okay. Click on next. Click on finish. Click on next and click on finish. My Spring Boot project is getting created, guys. Once the Spring Boot project is created, let's develop one simple REST controller which will take a request, get request, and which will give the response. Which will take a get request and which will give the response as a welcome message. Yeah, project creation is in progress, guys. Spring Boot 3.0 version came, so it is downloading the latest dependencies. So it is taking some time for that. Dependencies are getting downloaded. Dependencies are getting downloaded. Yeah, because of new version, dependencies are downloading. Meanwhile, can we create the Angular project also, guys? Angular project creation also will take time now. Shall I just create the Angular project? Yes, go to ng workspace, cmd. I'm going to use code space dot. It will open VS Code IDE, code space dot. Yes, with this VS Code IDE is opened. In this VS Code IDE, I'm going to create one new Angular project. App 8 is available. Now I will create app 9. App 8 is available. Let me create app 9. Go to terminal. Terminal, new terminal. PowerShell opened. I want a command prompt. Yes, I opened command prompt here. We can create a project by using ng new app 9. A new project will be created. I don't need any routing for this project. Just I want to see integration between Angular and Spring Boot. I don't need any routing here. I don't need any routing. Routing is not required. Press CN. Yes, CSS. Yeah, that project will be created. Now here, our backend Spring Boot application got created. Go to the pom.xml of our Spring Boot. Let us see the dependencies. Spring Boot version 3.0, which is the latest version, Java version 17, and the Spring Boot Starter Web. Guys, to use the Spring Boot 3, Java version 17 is mandatory. Spring Boot Starter Web and the DevTools available, test dependency. Web Starter we have taken. Now, let us go to our application. There is a Spring Boot start class is available at the boot application. Let me create one REST controller in this project. New class. I'm going to take one REST controller. So let me take it as my REST controller. I'm taking one REST controller in the Spring Boot application with a name called my REST controller. To represent this class as a REST controller, I'm giving one annotation called @REST controller. Inside this, I'm writing one method, public string get welcome message. So this method will return simple welcome message. Welcome to full stack. Welcome to full stack development. Welcome to full stack development return message. Okay, this method I will map to a URL pattern get mapping. Okay, fine guys. Now with this my Spring Boot application is ready. With this my Spring Boot application is ready. I no need to do any other change here. So Spring Boot will have a internal server. Just refresh this, right click, run as boot application. My Spring Boot application will run in the embedded server that will take Tomcat as the embedded server. That the Tomcat will run on the port number 8080. Tomcat will run on the port number 8080. I'm starting my Spring Boot application. Let's wait. Application is getting started. Once this Spring Boot application is started, we will access that from the browser and we will see application is working or not. If that application is working, then we need to access that application from the Angular application. Then we will understand integration, how Spring Boot will be integrated with Angular. This Spring Boot is failed, unsupported class version. Spring application has been compiled by a more recent version of the Java runtime, only recognize the class file version up to 52.0. Because of this Java version, there is a problem. Let me change the Spring Boot version to latest versions are having the issues. 2.5.5. I have downgraded my Spring Boot version to 2.5.5 and I'm removing the Java 17. Okay. Good. Let me update my Maven project. Maven, update the project, force update it. Force update it, right click and run as boot application. I'm running my boot project now. I'm running my boot project. Let's see here what is going to happen. I'm waiting for my project to run. Yes, project is getting started, guys. Once this project is started, let's try to access this project from the browser, which is localhost colon 8080. That is the default port number. Yes, welcome to full stack development. Guys, with this, can I say my Spring Boot application is running and we are able to access our Spring Boot application? Yes or no? With this, can I say my Spring Boot application is ready, which we are able to access from the browser? Yes or no? My Spring Boot application is running, which we are able to access from the browser. Then go to Angular. Angular project is created successfully, which is app 9. Angular project is created successfully, which is app 9. Now, what I want to do is, in this Angular application, I want to write one button. In the Angular application, I want to write one button. When that button is clicked, I want to write one button in the Angular application. When that button is clicked, I want to display message from the Spring Boot. So in the Angular application, I will display one button. When that button is clicked, I need to get the message from the Spring Boot application and I want to display. Okay, guys. Clear? Fine. Now here, First, I'm taking a welcome message. Later, we will see how to send the JSON data and how to receive the JSON data also. First, we need to understand the basic integration. Spring Boot is used to develop backend REST API for the application. Angular is used to develop front end of the application. Front end application contains a user interface. Backend APIs contains business logic. Front end application should access backend APIs. That is called full stack. Front end development plus backend development. To integrate Angular and Spring Boot. Angular application will send the request to Spring Boot. Spring Boot will send the request to Angular. Guys, tell me who should access whom? Angular should send the request to Spring Boot, or Spring Boot should send the request to Angular? Communication should happen from Angular to Spring Boot or Spring Boot to Angular? Angular to Spring Boot. User will access the Angular. Angular should access the Spring Boot. Now, here guys, if Angular application want to send a request to the Spring Boot application, this Angular application should send a request to the Spring Boot application. In order to send the request from Angular application to Spring Boot application, there is a concept called HTTP client. What is the concept we need to, guys? HTTP client. In the Angular application, we have HTTP client module to send the HTTP request from one server to another server. HTTP client module is used to send a request from one server to another server. HTTP client module is used to send the request from one server to another server. HTTP client module, Angular is having HTTP client module for integrating with the backend applications. In Angular, we have HTTP client module. In Angular, we have HTTP client module to communicate with backend APIs. Okay, HTTP client module is used to send the request from one server to another server. Now, our Angular application will communicate with the HTTP client module. HTTP client module will communicate with the backend APIs. So in the Angular, we need to write the logic to interact with the backend API. Angular application should communicate with the Spring Boot application. If Angular application want to communicate with the Spring Boot application, we need one mediator. Who is that mediator? HTTP client will act as a mediator between Angular application and Spring Boot application. Inside the Angular, we have HTTP client module to communicate with the backend APIs. By using this HTTP client module, we can send a request from one server to another server. So in the Angular, we need to write the logic of the HTTP client. That HTTP client module will communicate with the Angular application. Now, in order to use the HTTP client, first let us go to app module. Let us go to app module. In the app module TS file, only it is imported the browser module. Now I need to import HTTP client module also. Let me import HTTP client module also. This HTTP client module is available in common HTTP package. Okay, how we are importing ng module, browser module? Similarly, we need to import HTTP client module. In which package this client module is available? This client module is available in common HTTP package. HTTP client module is available in the Angular common HTTP package. Okay, HTTP client module is available in Angular common HTTP package. We have to import this package. We have to import this HTTP client module in app module. Got my point? What is the role of HTTP client? In the Angular, we have a HTTP client module to communicate with the backend APIs. HTTP client module is used to send the request from one server to another server. Angular will communicate with the HTTP client. HTTP client will communicate with the backend API. Where is that HTTP client available? HTTP client module is available in Angular common HTTP package. We have to import this HTTP client module in the app module. Then only this module will be bootstrapped when our application is started. Okay, are you guys clear with this step? Are you guys clear with this step? Yes or no? Why we are going for HTTP client module? Why I am importing HTTP client module in the Angular project? What is the purpose of HTTP client module? What is the purpose of HTTP client module? Come on guys. What is the purpose of HTTP client module? What is the role of the HTTP client module in our application now? HTTP client module is used to send a request. HTTP client module is used to send the request. HTTP client module is used to send the request. What request it is going to send? To whom it is going to send the request? What request it is going to send? To whom it is going to send the request? To whom it is going to send the request? Backend API. It is used to send the request to backend APIs. HTTP client module we are using in the Angular application that is used to send the request to backend APIs. What request? HTTP request. It is going to send HTTP request to the backend API. Backend API will execute some logic and it will give the response to the front end. HTTP client module will act as a mediator between front end application and backend application. HTTP client module will act as a mediator between Angular application and Spring Boot application. When user send a request to the Angular application will use a HTTP client to send the request to the Spring Boot application. My Spring Boot application already running. We are able to access. In the local machine only, my Spring Boot application is running. In the local machine, my Spring Boot application is running. Now, here I have imported HTTP client module. HTTP client module is used to communicate with the backend APIs. Perfect. I have imported this HTTP client module in the app module. Now, in this Angular application, I'm going to write one button. Remove everything from this. Remove everything from this. I want to write one simple button in the Angular template. I want to return simple button in the Angular template. Spring Boot plus Angular integration example. Spring Boot plus Angular integration. Spring Boot plus Angular integration. I want to display a title. And here I want to display one button, guys. When I click on the button, I want to get the response. Input type is equal to button. Input type is equal to button. Value is equal to some get message. Get a message. I'm writing a simple button. There is no logic available in this as of now. Just I have written a button. Now let us go here and let us run our application. Let us go here and let us run our application. ng serve. ng serve command I am using. This command we need to execute within the application cd space app9 cd space app9 ng serve. I am running this application. Okay, I'm running this application, guys. So as of now, no logic available. Just in the template file, I kept one button. There is no action for the button also. Just a normal button is available. For this button, we need to write the action. For this button, we need to write the action now. For this button, we need to write the action. When I click on that button, it should talk to Angular application. Yes, application is running. Let us wait. Application is running. Let us wait. Yes, application started. Now go here. Localhost colon 4200. Okay. Localhost colon 4200. Spring Boot plus Angular integration. Get message. Am I getting any message, guys? When I click on this button, anything happening? No. Spring Boot application running on the port number 8080. Angular is running on the port number 4200. So now in my system, Spring Boot application is running on the port number 8080. Spring Boot application running on the port number 8080. It is running inside Tomcat server. It is running inside the Tomcat server. Angular application running on the port number 4200. It is running inside the live server. It is running inside the live server. So two applications are running on two servers with two different port numbers. Spring Boot application running on the Tomcat server with the port number 8080. Angular application running on the live Spring Boot running on the Tomcat server with port number 8080. Angular application running on the port number 4200 in the live server. Okay, two applications are executing independently now. Localhost colon 8080. Welcome to full stack development. Here front end logic is available in the Angular application. One button is available. Currently, is there any link between my Angular application and Spring Boot application, guys? As of now, is there any link between Angular application and Spring Boot application? There is no link between Angular application and my Spring Boot application. Who will establish this link now? Who will establish this link now? Guys, who will establish this link now? Who will establish this link now? Come on. Who will establish this link now? Link should be established by HTTP client. HTTP client. Okay. Now go to app component class. Go to app component class. Here inside the app component class, I need to use HTTP client. I need to use HTTP client. Now I want to communicate from app component to HTTP client. For that, first we need to inject HTTP client into the app component by using dependency injection. First we need to import HTTP client class into this app component class. For that, we are going to use @inject. In the Java, we will use auto wiring. Similarly here in the Angular, we are going to use @inject. Private HTTP, variable name is HTTP, and I am going to use HTTP client. HTTP client. HTTP client is available in which package? HTTP client available in the common package. HTTP client from Angular common/HTTP. HTTP client is available in the HTTP client package. I'm importing that and I want to inject it. How to inject it? By using one annotation called @inject annotation. By using one annotation called @inject annotation. @inject annotation is also available in the core package. @inject, what I want to inject? I want to inject HTTP client. Here I'm doing dependency injection. I'm injecting HTTP client object into app component through constructor. In the Java, we will use auto wiring to inject one class object into another class object. In the Angular also, dependency injection concept is available, but the annotation is @inject. Now, my component class can use HTTP client class to perform backend calls. To perform backend calls. Now, to perform the backend call, I'm writing one method called getMessage. I'm writing one method called getMessage method. GetMessage method I am writing. Now here I'm going to declare one variable message. Message colon string is equal to simple welcome to Angular. Welcome to Angular. So this message I am writing here in this method, I need to reinitialize that I will do later. Message string I'm taking welcome to Angular. This message I will print in this, Angular application. By using interpolation, we can print the message. Okay, when I go to Angular application, button is available. By default, it is printing as welcome to Angular. Okay, so now welcome to Angular message is printing. When I click this get message button, it should print welcome to full stack development. This message should come. Currently, this message coming from the Angular. When I click on this button, it should get the message from the backend application. Now here I have taken one message variable. I'm displaying that message variable here. Here I have injected HTTP client object into my component class. I'm writing a get message method. Whenever I click this button, I want to call this function called get message function. How to establish the relation between the button and function? That's where we are going to use click event. Click event is equal to, I'm going to specify get message. Whenever you click this function, then whenever you click this button, then this function should execute. So can I say here this dot message is equal to button clicked, just to see button click is working or not? Yes. Now go to Angular get message button clicked. So when I click on this button, I'm getting as a button clicked. So that means, are we able to establish the relation between this button and this function? Guys, when I click on the button, my function is calling. Yes. Now here, when I click on this button, very clearly we are able to understand function is called. By default, it is displaying the message as welcome to Angular, hard-coded message. When I click that button, it is saying that button clicked. So that means this function is calling. Now remove this. How I established a relation between the button and function, guys? Which concept I used to establish the relation between the button and function? Which concept I used to establish the relation between the button and function? Click. Can I say click event? Event binding? Yes. In my template file, I have a button. Button is having a click event. Whenever you click, I'm telling to call this function. It is calling this function called get message. Already I have injected HTTP client. Into my component. Now here guys, here we are having URL. Backend URL is available. Now I need to send a request to the backend whenever this function is called. Observe very carefully. 2 lines of code I am going to write. That 2 lines of code will establish the communication between Angular and Spring Boot. Okay, HTTP client object is available. I want to make a get request. Spring Boot application is having a REST controller. That REST controller is binded to which request, guys? The REST control is binded to which request? Method is binded to which request in the Spring Boot? Get request. What is the URL pattern? / only. Go to Angular. Here, this dot HTTP client dot get. This dot HTTP client dot get. So I'm telling that send a get request to the Spring Boot application. HTTP dot // localhost 8080. Can I say this is the URL of my Spring Boot application? Can I say this is the URL of my Spring Boot application? Yes or no, guys? Yes, this is the URL of my Spring Boot application. I am writing this dot HTTP client. HTTP client is a variable which is holding HTTP client object. HTTP client dot get, I am giving URL. I am telling to this HTTP client to send a get request to this given URL. This is my backend REST API URL. HTTP client dot get of URL, I'm telling to send a get request. What response I'm going to get from that? What is the response my Spring Boot application is giving? Is it giving the JSON response or is it giving a text response now? My Spring Boot application is giving a JSON response, or my Spring Boot application giving a text response. Now it is giving a text response. Tomorrow it may give you a JSON. In future we will develop the API which will give the JSON. Now currently it is giving the text response. Let us tell to this HTTP client, hey HTTP client, you will get the response as a text from my Spring Boot. You will get the response as a text from my Spring Boot. That's it. This .http client.get, this is the URL of the backend API. Whenever you send a request to this URL, you will get the response type as a text data. You will get the response type as a text data. Once you got the response from the Spring Boot application, once you got the response from the Spring Boot application, you just subscribe to that response. Just means you wait for the response, and you get the response. So you are going to get the response. Once you got the response from my Spring Boot application, once you get the response from my Spring Boot application, you store that response into message variable. This dot message is equal to whatever the response you got, store that response into this message variable. So this is the meaning of that. Here HTTP client I am using. HTTP client, let me write this code once again. I'm writing one function called get message function. This function is binded to one event. This function is binded to one event in the template. In the template I have a get message button. Click is equal to get message. Whenever you click on the button, this function will be called. What this function has to do? This function has to communicate with the Spring Boot application by using HTTP client. How to access the Spring Boot application? Send a get request to this URL. Now how I am telling to HTTP client to send a get request? This .http client.get. If I want to send a post request tomorrow, if I want to submit the form tomorrow, then I will go for post method. In the Angular, if you develop a form, I want to send the form data to the Spring Boot, then you will go for post method. Today I want to send a get request. I'm going for get method. What is the URL of the Spring Boot application? This is the URL of my Spring Boot application. This is the URL of my Spring Boot application. HTTP client.get. HTTP client is a predefined component in the Angular to send a request. What request it has to send? It has to send the get request. To whom it has to send the get request? To this URL it has to send the get request. Once it send the get request, what response it is going to give us? It is giving the response type as a text. It is giving the response type as a text for us. Once it has given the response as a text, subscribe to that response. Okay, store the response into response variable. Once you got the response, then you store the response into this message variable. How to store the response into message variable? This is initialization. This dot message is equal to response. This dot message is equal to response. Okay, so here I'm sending a request and I'm subscribing to the response which is giving by this URL. Then I'm storing the response into this variable. This variable I'm printing on the template as a interpolation variable, interpolation property. Okay guys, I'm making a get request call to the backend application by using HTTP client. That backend API is giving me text response. Whatever the response I'm getting from the backend API, I'm subscribing to that response and I'm storing into current class variable. This variable I am printing on the template by using interpolation. Are you able to understand? Are you able to understand? Yes. Suppose in the REST controller, if your method is having some URL pattern, if our method is having some URL pattern in the backend application, then what we need to do? In the front end also, we are going to configure that URL /welcome like this. Okay. Now my backend application is having some URL localhost :8080/welcome. Now, if I have some URL here 8080/welcome, with that URL I'm able to access. In the Spring Boot application, I configure the URL pattern. Then in the front end, we are going to specify 8080/welcome. So the REST API method URL pattern we have to configure. That's it. That's it. Okay. With this integration completed or not? Can we test it? Is our integration working? Can we test it? Is our integration working as expected? Come on, guys. Go here. Go to here. Spring Boot application individually it is executing. Angular application individually it is executing. Now observe carefully. When I click the button, what message should come? What is the expected output when I click the button? What output should come when I click the button? What message should be displayed when I click the button? Welcome to full stack. Okay, guys. Now observe carefully. Click on this button. Anything happening? Anything happening when I click on the button? So integration success or integration failure? Integration success or integration is failure? Failed. Front-end application is not able to communicate with the back-end application. Integration failed. For Angular application, do we have a console to see the problem? Can I see anything in the terminal? Can I see anything in the terminal? Some problem is there. Some problem is there. Then what I need to do for that? Can I check the problem in the developer console? Yes or no? Go to inspect, go to console, go to console, clear the console, click on the button. When I click on the button, now see it is failed. It is giving the error also. Why it is failed? Access to XML HTTP request at localhost colon 8080 / welcome from origin 4200 has been blocked by CORS policy. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. Boss, in your local, when two servers are running, one server URL cannot access the another server URL because of CORS policy. In the Angular, this CORS policy issue we are getting. So Angular is running on one server, that is 4200. Spring Boot application running on the Tomcat server 8080. Here, this Angular application server is not able to access Spring Boot application server because of CORS policies. Because of CORS policies. Now we need to enable that in the Spring Boot. For that, we need to write one annotation called cross origin. We need to write one annotation called cross origin. We need to enable that CORS. We should allow the Angular application to access cross origin. I have written one annotation called cross origin. That means, so cross origin communication should be allowed. Any server should be able to send a request to my Spring Boot application. I have enabled that cross origin annotation on my Spring Boot application. Now go to our Angular. Now let's close this. Now refresh our Angular. Click on get message. Am I able to get the message now? Is my integration success now? Refresh. First it is displaying welcome to Angular. When I click on this button, welcome to full stack development. So integration is success. Integration is success. See how quickly it is responding, guys. See how quickly it is responding. When I click on this get button, do you feel that one application is talking to another application? When I click on this button, do you feel that one application is talking to another application? How quickly it is giving the response. That is the beauty of the Angular. That is the beauty of the Angular. The moment when I click the button, it is giving that. The moment when I click the button, it is giving that response. Okay, now can I write two buttons? Can I write two buttons? Let us see here. Let us see here. What I am going to do is, here I have written one method called get welcome. Welcome to full stack development. Welcome to full stack development. I have written one function /welcome. Let me go here. Let me go here. I'm writing /wish. /wish. Okay. /wish. I'm writing /wish message. In the Spring Boot application, I'm writing one more method, wish method. Here, what I'm doing is wish message. I'm giving all the best, my dear. All the best, my dear. I'm writing one more function, one more method in my Spring Boot. /welcome /wish. There are two different methods available. Welcome to full stack development /welcome /wish all the best, my dear friend. I'm writing all the best, my dear friend. Okay, now let's go to Angular. In the Angular, here I will make this method as a get to welcome message method. Let me map this method to this button. Now I'm going to write one more button here, get a welcome message. This button is get welcome message. This button is get a wish message. Get a wish message. Now I will write one more function here, get a wish message function. Got it? Get a wish message function I am writing. What is the responsibility of the wish message? Wish message function should access this method. Welcome message function accessing this method. Angular application is having two buttons now. Angular application will have two buttons now. One button will represent welcome message. Another button will represent wish message. So here I'm going to write it as get wish message. Get wish message. So here get welcome message available, get wish message function is available. What I will do in this function, this dot http client dot get request only. What get request? http colon double slash localhost colon 8080 slash wish comma. What is the response type I am getting? I'm getting the response type as a text. I'm getting the response type as a text. Dot subscribe. Whatever the response we are getting from the Spring Boot application, initialize that response into this message variable. Store the response into message variable. This method will access /welcome URL. This method will access /wish URL. Okay. Now in my front end application, there are two buttons available. One is get welcome message button. Another one is get wish message button. Whenever you click get message button, it should call get welcome message function. When you click on wish message button, it should call get wish message function. Okay, so two buttons are having event binding. Two buttons are having two different functions mapped. So first function will call /welcome URL. Second function will call /wish URL. Now go to our Angular application. Now by default, what message is coming? Welcome to Angular. From where the welcome to Angular is coming? Default message. So default message is available, welcome to Angular. Click on get welcome message. We are getting welcome to full stack development. Click on get wish message. We are getting all the best, my dear friend. So integration is working now. If I load it, by default, this UI message is coming. This message is available in the Angular only. Welcome to Angular. If I click on get wish message, all the best, my dear friend. If I click on get welcome message, welcome to full stack development. So these buttons are having the action, and whenever I click on the button, a function is calling. In the template, we have the button. When I click on that button in the template, that a template is sending the request to this button is having a event binding. When I click on this button, this function is calling. This function is calling http client.get. It is sending a request to Spring Boot application. Okay, that Spring Boot application giving the response as a text. That a text response I'm subscribing, I'm storing into this message variable. That message I am printing in the template by using interpolation. Okay, guys. Are we able to integrate our Spring Boot with Angular successfully? It is very simple integration. Just to 2 lines of code we have written. It is simple integration. Just we have written 2 lines of code. So now how the integration is happened between the Spring Boot and Angular? Who is acting as a mediator between the Spring Boot and Angular? Who is acting as a mediator between Spring Boot and Angular? HTTP client. HTTP client. Can I say one application is accessing another application? Can I say one application is accessing another application? What issue we faced what issue we faced first time when I access Spring Boot application from Angular? CORS issue. How we resolve that CORS issue? Guys, how we resolve that CORS issue? By using cross origin annotation. Where I used that cross origin annotation? In my Spring Boot application, I configured cross origin annotation to enable that communication. At the rate cross origin annotation I specified in the Spring Boot to enable that communication. To enable that communication. Okay, so now what we have done here, steps to develop full stack. Steps to develop full stack application. Everybody should practice this application, guys. Tomorrow we will practice post method. I will develop a form in the Angular. Form data I will send it to Spring Boot application in the tomorrow session. Steps to develop a full stack application. What is the first step? Create a Spring Boot application. Create a Spring Boot application. Create Spring Boot application using STS IDE. Then create a REST controller. Create Spring Boot application using STS IDE with the below dependencies. What are the dependencies I have used? I used Spring Boot Web Starter. I used Spring Boot Web Starter and I used DevTools. Two dependencies only I have added. Create a REST controller. Create REST controller with required methods. Create REST controller with required methods like below. Now my REST controller is available like this. My REST controller is available like this. Now, what is the third step? Run the Spring Boot application. Run the Spring Boot application. So this is our third step. Okay, run the Spring Boot application. By default, it will run in embedded Tomcat. By default, it will run in embedded Tomcat. Embedded Tomcat server. Okay, now step 4, create Angular application. Create Angular application using VS Code IDE. Okay, then next step, import HTTP client module in app module TS file. Import HTTP client module in app module TS file. Okay, then next one, create functions in app component class to handle template request. Okay, then design presentation logic in template file. Okay guys, I created Angular application using VS Code IDE. What is the command? ng-new app. ng-new app. We need to import HTTP client module in the app module.ts file. So this is my app module.ts file. In the app module.ts file, I have imported this HTTP client module. HTTP client module is available in Angular Common HTTP package. Then after, create functions in the app component class to handle template request. So this is my app component.ts file. I have taken a message. I have imported HTTP client and I have taken my functions. These functions are used to handle HTTP request. Okay, this is my app component class. This is one function. This is one function. This function is accessing /welcome URL. This function is accessing /wish URL. Okay, this is my component class. Design presentation logic in the template file. app.component.template. In the template file, what I have done, I created two buttons and buttons are mapped to event binding. When I click one button, that button will call this function. That function will call the Spring Boot application. Spring Boot application will give the response. Function will bind the response to a very property. That property I am printing by using interpolation. Okay, now next step is run the Angular application. Run the Angular application. Run the Angular application to test integration logic. Run the Angular application to test our integration logic. By following these steps, can you develop full stack project, guys? By following these steps, can you develop this logic? Can you develop this project? Anything difficult? Anything difficult, guys? A simple integration we have done and complex integrations we need to do. Forms development. My form will be available in the Angular. When I submit the form in the Angular, form data should go to my Spring Boot application. Spring Boot application should insert the data in the database table, and I should be able to retrieve the data, and I should be displayed that data. Okay, today I have written that integration logic in the component class, but is it recommended to write the business logic in the component, guys? Actually, where we should write this logic? We should write this integration logic in the component, or we should write in the service? Where we should write that? Actually, we should write that in the service. Tomorrow session, we will write that logic in the service. Whatever the logic I'm writing by using HTTP client, this logic will write in the service. What we will do? This function we will write in the service. Service class function we will call from the component class function. That's it. In the tomorrow, I will develop that application. I will develop one form. So by using that form, we are going to store the data. Spring Boot will store the data in the database. Angular will have a form. When I submit the form, form data will go to Spring Boot as a JSON. Spring Boot will store the data in the database. And we will retrieve the data from the Spring Boot. We'll display the data in the front end in the JSON format. Guys, are you able to understand the integration? Easy? Easy or difficult? Yeah. Now you are feeling it is easy because you have idea on the Angular concepts. That is the reason you are feeling it is easy. We understand the basics of the Angular, then we are seeing the integration. That's why you are feeling that it is easy now. So tomorrow we will develop one form in the Angular. That form data I will send it to Spring Boot. How Spring Boot application will take the form data? As a post request. Today I have taken a get request method. Tomorrow I will take a post request method. Tomorrow I will take a post request method. So Angular application will send a post request with the form data. Form data will go to the Spring Boot. Spring Boot will insert the data in the database table. That's it. Okay, guys. Perfect. So this is integration example. Anybody having any questions on this now? You can ask the questions. Yes. Anybody having any questions?
By default, that Spring Boot using 8080 port only, right? Can we
Yes.
change that?
Yes, we can change that, sir. We can change that.
Sir, any special dependency required for it?
Not required. To change the port number,
During this integration?
No. Just web dependency. In the Spring Boot, there is no special dependency required for this because we are having web starter. By using that web starter, we are developing a REST controller.
By default,
hello, sir.
dependencies we get only that much.
No. I have added web starter dependency. By default, whenever you create the Spring Boot application, web starter will not come. You need to select this web starter dependency.
Hello, sir.
I have given the dependency details.
Okay.
Sir, actually,
front-end application is running on different server.
Yes.
Hello, sir. If we are using the security in a Spring Boot application, then
forget about all those things, man. First, we are talking about integration. Once it is done, then we'll talk about security.
Okay,
So,
sir.
Integration we can do by using Ajax. Sir.
The HTTP client internally using Ajax only. Whatever the HTTP client methods I am calling in a HTTP client.get, internally this HTTP client will use Ajax concept.
Sorry, you can teach, sir, Ajax.
This is Ajax only, sir. This is Ajax only. HTTP client internally using Ajax. So that means without refreshing the web page, request is sending to the backend. That means it is a Ajax call only.
Okay.
It is Ajax call only. Yes, sir.
when we'll deploy, we'll deploy it in both separate port number, or else we'll make
So
it.
there are two ways. There are two ways to do the deployment of this application now. What we can do is Spring Boot application will be deployed as one Docker image. Angular application will be deployed as one Docker image. That is one style. And another way is Angular application will be packaged. Angular application code will be copied into the Spring Boot application, and the Spring Boot application will be deployed. I will show you both deployment approaches. In two ways we can deploy this application. So front end is one application, back end is one application. So what people will do is this back end application will be deployed in the separate server. Front end application will be deployed in the separate server. If not like that, if you want to deploy as in the single server, Angular application should be built by using ng build command. Whenever you create ng build command, it is going to build that code will as a dist directory. Whatever the dist directory is created for the Angular, that the dist directory code will keep in the Spring Boot resources folder and will deploy the Spring Boot for project directly. Two ways we can do the deployment.
Okay. So previously in my project, we are actually building it as Ambient pre-install, like the Angular app also. Or else we are building.
No. That means whatever the Angular application they have now, for the Angular application, they will execute one command like ng build command. Whenever they execute ng build command, Angular code will be packaged. How we will do the Maven package for the Spring Boot? Similarly, Angular project will be packaged by using ng build. Whenever we do the ng build, it will generate a dist folder. Your complete Angular code will be packaged into distributed directory. That dist directory will copy into Spring Boot project. I will show that in the upcoming classes.
Do you have any material? I mean, interview questions of Angular?
I don't have that, sir. I don't have it.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes,
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. What is a cross-origin policy that you explained just now? Why it is stopping the
I
application?
will show that. I will talk about that. So whenever two servers are running on the same machine, so it will not accept that. When two servers are running on the same machine, it will not accept that connection. So I will tell you what is that course in the tomorrow session. So in order to allow that cross origin, we are writing this annotation.
Yeah,
then it is allowing.
Actually, I faced this problem a lot in real-time projects, production server. So
Okay.
that's why I asked.
Sure, sir. I will demonstrate on this.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Front end to back end connection, sir.
Yes, we already done that, na? Today class is that only.
Sir, what is the Axios library?
Uh-huh.
Axios library, why is it?
I did not understand.
Sir, is it Axios library also used to call the API, like HTTP client?
Yeah, Axon API. Yeah, in the React.js, they will use Axon API to make a calls from the React application to Spring Boot application. But in the Angular, directly HTTP client package is available. Okay, now see, whenever I do ng build command, here it is generated one folder called dist folder. So in the dist folder, complete Angular project code is packaged into main.js file. So we will copy the content of the dist folder, we'll keep in the Spring Boot project. That is one way of integration. We'll talk about that.
Sir,
Okay.
actually,
Yes, madam.
sir, actually in a Spring Boot application, there is only one method. If there are in real project, if there are many methods, so how we can give this in subscribe?
No, for every method in the REST controller, we will write one function in the Angular application.
So for every method, we have to write.
Yes, we have to
subscribe
write.
separately?
Yes, we have to write. Then that is called integration, right?
Okay.
We have to do that.
Thank you.
Fine, guys. Thank you. I will upload these class notes into the portal. All of you, please go through these notes and please complete this integration example. Tomorrow we will work on another integration with the post request and form submissions. Okay. Thank you, guys. We'll see you in the tomorrow's class.